The clock on the wall of Dr. Aris Thorne's lab read 9:02 p.m. The fluorescent lights hummed with a familiar sterile energy, a low-frequency buzz that had been a constant companion for the better part of 2 decades. The air itself smelled of ozone, old coffee, and the faint metallic scent of heated electronics. Aris, a man whose professional life was a constant high-stakes game of digital cat and mouse, leaned back in his chair, rubbing the deep-set lines around his eyes. He'd just closed a particularly nasty ransomware loop, a digital hydra that had been trying to strangle a hospital network for hours. The relief was not a celebratory whoop, but a dull, welcome throb behind his temples. He took a long sip of his now cold coffee, the bitterness a small grounding comfort. Suddenly, the hum died. It wasn't a flicker, it wasn't a stutter, it was a complete, instantaneous cessation of all sound. The fluorescent lights went out, and the lab plunged into an unnatural, absolute darkness. Aris's breath hitched, a small, involuntary gasp. His hand instinctively went to the mouse, but the screen was already black. The faint red and green lights on the server racks, a constellation of digital life, vanished in unison. The low whir of the cooling fans, the quiet drip of the coffee pot, everything was silent. This wasn't a power outage. A deep, instinctual alarm bell, a relic from his days as a field agent, rang in his head. The server racks, the heart monitors on the workbench, the triple redundant emergency backups, all silent. Even the quiet, low-level buzz of the city outside had vanished. This was different. This was total. The silence was more terrifying than any noise. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that pressed in on him. He could feel the panic rising in his chest, a raw, primal fear that had nothing to do with code and everything to do with survival. His government-issued emergency satellite phone, a secure device he hadn't used in years, vibrated on his desk, a jarring, mechanical rattle in the stillness. It felt like a ghost, a remnant of a world that no longer existed. He snatched it up, the screen's low light illuminating his face, a mask of grave concern. His features were stark in the glow, his eyes wide and alert, the color drained from his cheeks. He pressed it to his ear. "Thorne," a gruff voice barked. It was General Marcus Vance, his one-time mentor, a man who had taught him how to think like a ghost and hunt like a predator. Now, a high-ranking official at the Department of Energy, his voice was filled not with his usual command, but with a raw, controlled fury. It was a sound Aris had only heard once before, during a major global crisis. "We have a full grid collapse, all 50 states, 0 point, no residual power. You see anything on your end?" Aris swallowed hard, his throat dry. He could feel the unspoken questions hanging in the air. How? Why? He struggled to keep his own voice from shaking. He needed to be the calm in Vance's storm. He took a deep, steadying breath. "General, the lights are out in my lab," Aris replied, his voice calm but taut with a controlled fear. This wasn't a surge. This wasn't an overload. We didn't trip a breaker. This was an elegant shutdown. There was a moment of static silence on the other end of the line. The word elegant hung in the air, a professional diagnosis that sounded like a death sentence. Elegant. General Vance's voice was filled with a new level of cold fury, a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. "It's a goddamn attack, Thorne. We have chaos in the streets, riots in the cities. People are trapped in subways, in elevators. We're losing hospitals. This isn't elegant, it's an act of war. You need to get to the command center, now. We need you to tell us what this elegant shutdown is and how we fix it." Aris's knuckles were white as he clutched the phone. He could hear the desperate urgency in Vance's voice, the barely contained panic of a man who was used to being in control. "I'm on my way," he said quietly, hanging up without another word. He sat for a moment in the darkness, the silence of his lab deafening. He looked out the window at a city he'd spent his career protecting from digital threats. He'd fought viruses, Trojans, state-sponsored attacks, and everything in between. But the city that had always been a glittering mosaic of light and life was no longer a city of light, but a silent, suffocating tomb of pure darkness. He knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The air in the underground Federal Cyber Command Center was a thick, suffocating blend of stale coffee and pure, unadulterated panic. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting a sickly yellow pallor over a room filled with overworked analysts hunched over dark screens, their faces illuminated only by the faint, shifting glow of monitors running on emergency power. Every whisper was sharp, every movement a jolt of nervous energy. The low, constant hum of the emergency generators was a constant reminder of the fragility of the moment, a stark contrast to the absolute silence Aris had left behind. He was immediately ushered into a tense meeting room. The holographic tactical display at the center of the table was a black canvas, punctuated by a single, blinking red light at its core, a visual representation of the total grid failure. General Vance stood at the head of the table, his face haggard and gaunt, the usual stoicism replaced by a deep-seated weariness. Next to him stood a woman with piercing blue eyes and a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor. Her posture was rigid, her jaw set. This was Agent Lena Petrova, the head of the FBI Cyber Division. Dr. Thorne, Agent Petrova believes this is a simple state-sponsored attack, General Vance said, his tone heavy with exhaustion, as if every word was a physical weight. A zero-day exploit, a virus of some kind. They found a known vulnerability and exploited it. Lena stepped forward, her expression unreadable, a mask of professional control. It's the most logical conclusion. The attack vectors, the timing, the precision, it all points to a nation-state actor. Her eyes, a striking blue in the low light, flickered over Aris. A flicker of skepticism played at the corners of her mouth. With all due respect, Doctor, there's nothing elegant about it. It's brute force, a digital shotgun blast that hit every system at once. Aris shook his head slowly, a muscle in his jaw ticking. He met her gaze directly, his own eyes burning with the conviction of a man who understood the language of the machine better than he understood human speech. "You're looking at the symptoms, Agent," he said, his voice low and intense. He held her gaze, forcing her to listen. "The fire is still burning, but the cause, the code that did this, it's not brute force, it's a digital masterpiece." Lena's brows furrowed slightly, a ripple in her otherwise perfect composure. She was listening now. Aris walked over to a dark terminal, his fingers flying across the keys with an almost subconscious speed. The screen flickered to life, showing a chaotic mess of fragmented data, a digital explosion of corrupted files and looping code. "Look at the attack signature," he said, pointing to a small, almost invisible segment of the code. "It's too clean, too precise. Brute force leaves wreckage. It leaves logs, backdoors, and a trail of digital fingerprints. This didn't. It didn't just overload the systems. It rewrote the very core of the grid's operating system. It's a complete structural rewrite, a ghost in the machine." Lena's brows furrowed further, her skepticism giving way to a grudging interest. She glanced at General Vance, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Then find the ghost, Doctor," she said, her voice now filled with a new, professional urgency. "And do it fast." As Aris began to dive deeper into the fragmented, self-destructing data, he felt a sudden, familiar chill. His fingers stilled over the keyboard. His heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He saw it. A single, seemingly random string of code buried deep within the network telemetry. It was a line of obsolete, forgotten programming language, a signature only one person in the world would have used, the same person who had taught him everything. He looked at the code, his expression hardening into a grim certainty. This wasn't a nation-state. This wasn't a random act of terror. This was a message. This was personal. The hours that followed turned into a blur of code and caffeine. The command center was a pressure cooker, the air thick with the unspoken tension of a country on the verge of collapse. Aris sat at his station, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a frantic, desperate energy. His eyes, bloodshot and dry from the strain, were fixed on the lines of text that scrolled across the monitor. He was a man possessed, a master artisan trying to unravel a masterpiece he'd never thought possible. Lena stood behind him, her arms crossed, a silent sentinel. Her initial skepticism had slowly but surely given way to a grudging respect. She had seen countless programmers in her career, but none with the sheer raw intensity of Aris Thorne. He wasn't just analyzing the code, he was speaking its language, and she could see the conversation playing out on his face. "What is that?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper, so as not to break his concentration. She pointed to a looping section of code that seemed to rewrite itself even as it was being displayed. "It keeps overwriting itself." Aris didn't look up from the screen. "It's a digital ghost," he said, his voice low and intense, filled with the certainty of a man who was facing a familiar demon. "A self-healing, self-destructing algorithm. It's designed to leave no trace. Every time we think we found a way in, it changes the vector. It's a hydra. Cut off one head and two more appear. The more we try to kill it, the stronger it gets." Lena's brow furrowed in a deep, frustrated frown. "So how do we kill it?" she pressed, her voice laced with the kind of frustration that comes from fighting an enemy you can't see, an enemy that doesn't follow the rules of engagement. Aris finally stopped typing and leaned back in his chair, a long, weary sigh escaping his lips. He finally looked at her, his eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep, held a glimmer of something more, a flicker of painful recognition. "You can't," he said, quietly. The word hung in the air, a punch to the gut. "Not with a firewall or an antivirus. This is a logic bomb designed to be unkillable. It's a ghost because it isn't real. It's an idea. It's a copy of a program designed to be unhackable. It's the perfect weapon." He turned back to the screen, his fingers moving with newfound purpose. He had found the ghost, and now he knew its name. He began to type with a frantic, desperate energy. But whoever wrote it made a mistake, a small one, right here. He pointed to the string of obsolete code he had spotted earlier. It was a small, almost insignificant detail, but to Aris it was a thunderclap. They left a signature, a fingerprint, if you will. Lena leaned over, her face so close to his she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Her own expression was a mix of intense focus and a dawning sense of alarm. "Whose fingerprint is it, Aris?" she asked, her voice a low, urgent murmur. He paused, his hands stilled over the keyboard. A flicker of painful memory crossed his face, and his expression hardened. He exhaled slowly, the air tasting like defeat. "Mine," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "Or at least it's a version of my work. Years ago, I worked with a colleague, a brilliant but unstable programmer named Marcus Vance. We created this very ghost code as a theoretical weapon to prove a point. But Marcus, he went dark. He disappeared. The world thinks he's dead." A look of shocked recognition crossed Lena's face. Her eyes went wide and her jaw dropped. Marcus Vance? The Vance who was a key figure in the cyber warfare project 10 years ago? The one they said died in a lab fire? She looked at Aris, her expression one of utter disbelief. They said he was a hero. Aris nodded, his jaw tight. The very one. The ghost code is a mirror of his work. But why would he do this? He was a patriot. "People change, Doctor," Lena said, her tone suddenly cold, the professional mask of control falling back into place. Her blue eyes were now hard, devoid of emotion. Motives change. We need to find him. Aris looked back at the screen, the ghost code pulsing on the monitor. He knew Marcus, and he knew something was terribly wrong. He had to find him, not just to stop the blackout, but to find out the truth. The past, he knew, was now haunting the present, and the ghost he had to hunt was a ghost of his own making. The trail led them deep into the Appalachian Mountains. The journey was a descent into an almost primal silence, a stark and eerie contrast to the digital chaos they'd left behind. Aris drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Lena tracked their coordinates on a satellite map. The winding, unpaved roads were empty, the forest pressing in on both sides like a dark, silent judgment. The air, crisp and cold, was a constant reminder that this was a physical world, a world where the power grid meant the difference between life and death. When they finally found the cabin, it looked abandoned. It was a dilapidated, off-grid structure that seemed to have been swallowed by the dense wilderness. But as they approached on foot, the scent of burning wood and the fresh footprints in the mud told a different story. This wasn't a relic of the past. It was a fortress of a man on the run. Aris knocked on the door. His heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. Nothing. He knocked again, harder this time, his fist pounding against the old wood. The door cracked open, and a man with a wild, unkempt beard and haunted eyes peered out. He was gaunt and thin, his clothes threadbare, but it was unmistakably him. It was Marcus Vance, older, thinner, but the same ghost of a man Aris had known. "Aris," Marcus whispered, his voice a hoarse, broken thing. His eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and surprise, darted back and forth between Aris and Lena, as if looking for something in the trees behind them. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "The ghost code," Aris said, his voice flat, the single phrase carrying the weight of a decade of questions. "Your signature. Marcus, what did you do?" A dark cloud passed over Marcus's face. He let them in, his hands trembling as he closed the door behind them. The cabin was a fortress of paranoia. Every window was boarded up, with small slits cut out for a line of sight. A complex array of homemade sensors and alarms, a web of wires and jury-rigged tripwires was hidden throughout the cabin, silent sentinels watching for an unseen enemy. "I didn't do this, Aris," Marcus said, his voice cracking, filled with a desperate plea for his friend to believe him. He sat down heavily, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "They stole it. It wasn't just my ghost code. It was a fragment of my soul. I built it to be a weapon, but a weapon that could never be fired, a theoretical impossibility. But they—" He looked up at Aris, his eyes filled with a desperate, agonizing pain. "They finished it. They weaponized it." "Who, Marcus?" Lena asked, her voice calm and firm, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil in the room. She was a trained interrogator, and her expression was one of professional focus. "Who stole it?" Marcus flinched, glancing nervously at the door, at the boarded-up windows. "They're still watching," he muttered, his voice a low, frantic whisper. "They're everywhere. I can't tell you, but I can tell you this. The ghost code isn't just a program, it's a lock. And to break the lock, you need a physical key, a piece of hardware. It's the only way to kill it." Aris's expression tightened, the grim certainty in his eyes deepening. "Where is it?" "It's a quantum processor," Marcus said, pulling a crumpled sketch from his pocket. The paper was worn and smudged, a testament to how long he'd carried it. "It's a one-of-a-kind. It was supposed to be destroyed, but they repurposed it. It's locked away in a high-security data center, the one they call the Fortress." Lena's face paled. The Fortress was a name whispered only in the highest circles of intelligence. It was a black site, a digital purgatory, impenetrable and off-limits to everyone. The one person who knew its every detail was Marcus. He paused, a terrifying thought dawning on him. "And you're saying the person who stole the code has a silent partner?" Aris asked, his voice low, the pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place in his mind. "Not just one," Marcus whispered, his face twisted in a silent, agonizing pain. He looked at Aris, his haunted eyes pleading. "They're everywhere, and one of them is likely right behind you." His eyes widened, and he pointed past Aris, his finger trembling. "You trusted them. They're here." As Marcus spoke, a sudden, piercing alarm blared through the cabin. The sound was a shrill, jarring intrusion in the quiet of the forest, a high-pitched digital shriek that cut through the silence. On his makeshift sensor panel, a small red light began to flash with a frantic, pulsating rhythm. Marcus's eyes went wide with a familiar terror, the haunted look he'd worn since their arrival morphing into a raw, animal fear. "They're here," he gasped, his voice filled with frantic urgency. His hands trembled, his shoulders hunching as if to protect himself from an invisible blow. "They found me. I told you, they're everywhere." Aris and Lena moved with a practiced, seamless grace. Their hands went to their weapons, their eyes scanning the dense forest outside. The quiet, peaceful woods were now an open, terrifying threat. They had no idea who they were, but the sheer speed and precision of their arrival was a testament to their deadly nature. The cabin, which moments ago had felt like a refuge, was now a death trap. Marcus frantically began to pack a small, worn satchel, shoving old hard drives and a battered laptop inside. "The key, Marcus, we need the key," Aris insisted, his voice a low growl, pushing past the panicked urgency. "Tell us where the fortress is." "No time," Marcus said, shaking his head, his motions jerky and desperate. He wasn't listening. He was already in a different frame of mind, a different kind of fight. "They're coming for the prototype. The ghost code is just a piece of it. The real weapon is in the lab. I can't let them have it." A gunshot rang out, the sound of a high-powered rifle shattering the forest silence. A bullet smashed through the cabin window, the glass exploding inward, and narrowly missed Aris's head, embedding itself in the wooden wall behind him with a wet thud. He and Lena ducked for cover, the volley of gunfire from the surrounding trees erupting in a terrifying symphony of destruction. Marcus, however, didn't flinch. He ran to a hidden panel in the wall, his hands moving with a surgeon's precision. He pulled out a small metallic device. It was a prototype of a new processor, a small, sleek, and highly advanced piece of hardware that hummed with a low, barely perceptible energy. "This is the key," he said, his voice filled with a desperate finality as he thrust it into Aris's hands. His eyes, burning with a new, fierce determination, locked with his friend's. "This is the only thing that can disable the ghost code. It's designed to interface with the core logic. It's the back door to the back door." Just as he finished, a figure emerged from the trees, their face obscured by a tactical mask. They moved with a chilling, professional grace, and they were heading straight for the cabin. It was clear they weren't here to kill them, but to retrieve the prototype. "Go! Get out of here!" Marcus yelled, his face a mask of determination. He ran to his computer, his fingers flying across the keys with a furious, impossible speed. "I'll create a diversion. I'll give them something else to look at." Aris and Lena scrambled out the back door as Marcus's lab began to glow with a strange, unnatural light. A bright, searing flash of energy filled the cabin, and a deep, guttural roar filled the air. An ear-splitting explosion rocked the ground just as they reached the edge of the clearing. They turned to see the cabin engulfed in flames, the smoke rising in a dark, ominous plume against the night sky. Marcus was gone. "He's not just a hacker, Aris," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly, her eyes wide with shock and a hint of something that looked like awe. Aris looked at the prototype in his hand, his knuckles white, the cold metal a stark reminder of his friend's sacrifice. Marcus's final, desperate act had bought them time, but not much. They were one step closer to understanding the ghost code, but now they were alone. And they had a new, terrifying mystery to solve. Who were the shadowy figures who had hunted Marcus down? And how had they known exactly where to find him? The silent partner, it seemed, was closer than they had ever imagined. With the prototype in hand, the forest became a blur behind them. The journey back to Washington, D.C. was a silent, grim affair. The cool, quiet air of the mountains gave way to the suffocating stillness of a city without power. The streets, once a vibrant tapestry of light and life, were now dark, silent canyons. The only sign of life was the occasional flicker of a police car's emergency lights in the distance, or the eerie glow of a gas station's generator. The quiet was a constant, unsettling presence, a reminder of the scale of the enemy they faced. Their target was the Fortress, a government data center so secure it wasn't even on the map. It was a brutalist monolith of dark gray concrete, a windowless cube of sheer, unyielding force. It looked less like a building and more like a tombstone for the digital age, surrounded by a maze of automated turrets and high-voltage fences that hummed with a menacing low-frequency buzz. As Aris and Lena approached, they could feel the oppressive weight of its security. "The only way in is to go through a direct breach," Aris said, his voice flat as he studied the blueprints he'd acquired from a contact. A favor he'd have to pay back, and soon. The plans, a complex map of the building's internal defenses, were a testament to the fortress's near-impenetrable nature. Every server, every system is hardwired. The only way to stop the ghost code is to upload a neutralizing sequence directly into the main mainframe. Lena, her face lit by the dim glow of her tablet, glanced at the blueprints. Her lips, usually set in a grim line, curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "So we're going in the front door then?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of excitement. She was in her element now. This wasn't a digital battle of ones and zeros. This was her kind of fight. Physical, tactical, and with a clear objective. She was a professional, and this was the kind of challenge she lived for. Aris nodded, his eyes scanning the detailed plans. "We'll have to get past the turrets, the security systems, and the patrol. We'll use the prototype to bypass the main server and disable the ghost code from within." Under the cover of darkness, they initiated their plan. Aris, with a small team of engineers he had called in from an emergency list, created a diversion on the main grid. With his instructions, they caused a minor power fluctuation that would draw the security detail to the other side of the facility. As the guards moved in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, Aris and Lena scaled the fortress wall, moving with the practiced ease of professional operatives. They were a study in contrasts. Aris, the brilliant but physically awkward academic. Lena, the fluid, silent, and deadly agent. They made it inside, but a sudden, unexpected alarm blared, a jarring, mechanical siren that tore through the quiet of the night. A single, small security camera had caught their movements. "They've changed the patrol patterns," Lena hissed, her voice tight with urgency, her eyes scanning the hallway. "They knew we were coming." "Who knew?" Aris asked, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cold dread that had settled in his stomach the moment the alarm sounded was now a freezing wave of terror. The only person who had access to these plans was... He trailed off, the words dying in his throat. The betrayer. The silent partner Marcus had warned them about. It wasn't an external enemy. It was a mole within their own network. The realization was a gut punch, a terrible betrayal of everything he thought he knew. They were trapped. A group of heavily armed guards, their faces covered by tactical masks, appeared at the end of the hallway, their weapons raised. Lena pushed Aris behind a server rack, her voice tight with urgency. "Go," she said, her eyes locked with his. "I'll cover you." Aris hesitated, but he knew she was right. He couldn't afford to be captured. He had to reach the mainframe. He had to stop the ghost code. He had to finish what Marcus had started. The prototype, a cold weight in his hand, was the only hope for a city plunged into darkness. He took a deep, shaky breath and began to run. Aris sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors of the fortress, the sound of gunfire and shouting echoing behind him. The air was frigid, filled with the sterile, metallic scent of high-end electronics and the faint, bitter tang of ozone. The only light came from the blinking LEDs on the server racks that lined the walls, a silent, chaotic symphony of red, green, and blue. Each turn was a new, identical hallway, a dizzying maze designed to confuse and disorient. He could hear Lena's gunshots, followed by a sharp intake of breath. The sounds were fading, and he knew she was holding her own, but he also knew she couldn't hold out forever. He had to move faster. He reached the server room, a vast chamber that felt less like a room and more like a digital cathedral. The ceiling was a dizzying array of pipes and conduits, and the floor was a network of raised tiles that hummed with a deep, resonating energy. The centerpiece was the main mainframe, a towering metallic structure that stretched from floor to ceiling, a true behemoth of computational power. He found the access port he had seen on the blueprints, a small, unassuming panel at the base of the machine, and began to work, his fingers a blur. The prototype felt heavy in his hand, a cold, metallic piece of hope in a world of darkness. Just as he was about to insert the prototype, a voice, calm and chilling, spoke from the shadows. "Don't do it, Thorne. You're a pawn in a game you don't understand." Aris froze, his heart seizing in his chest. He spun around, his eyes wide, his body tensed for a fight. A figure stepped into the light, and his heart sank with a terrible, nauseating finality. It was General Vance, the man he had looked up to for years, the man who had trained him, who had trusted him with this mission. The shock was a physical blow, a pain more profound than any bullet could inflict. "General!" Aris's voice was a whisper of disbelief, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. His face, which had been a mask of grim determination, crumpled in a mixture of shock and betrayal. You're the silent partner?" General Vance smiled, a cold, empty expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, Aris, but this is the only way. This country is soft. It's weak. It's been coddled by technology for too long. It needs a wake-up call, a new beginning." His voice was low and reasoned, a calm explanation for a monstrous act. It was the voice of a true believer, which was even more terrifying than the voice of a villain. "By plunging it into the dark ages?" Aris spat, his face a mask of betrayal and righteous fury. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with a raw, impotent rage. "This isn't a wake-up call, General. This is mass murder. The hospitals are failing. People are dying." "A few sacrifices for the greater good," General Vance said, shrugging, his eyes devoid of emotion. He looked at Aris not with anger, but with a kind of pity and condescension. "The ghost code is a reset button, a clean slate, and with the prototype, I'll be able to control the entire system. I'll be the one to turn the lights back on. I'll be the one to save the country." He reached for the prototype, and Aris instinctively pulled back. The cold metal felt like a lifeline. He clutched it to his chest, his eyes wide. "You're a madman," he said, his voice trembling with a righteous fury. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, what he was seeing. This wasn't the man he had known. General Vance's calm facade broke, and his expression hardened. He lunged forward, his movements surprisingly quick and powerful for a man of his age. They struggled for the prototype, a silent, desperate battle that was less about strength and more about survival. Just then, Lena, bruised but alive, appeared at the entrance, her gun raised. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard and focused. "Drop it, General," she said, her voice hard as steel. "It's over." Vance laughed, a short, humorless sound. "It's never over, Agent. Not until I have what I came for." He threw a small metallic device at the floor, and a blinding flash of light filled the room, followed by a thick plume of smoke. When it cleared, he was gone, and so was the prototype. Aris sank to his knees, his hands trembling. The prototype, the key, was gone. The ghost code was still running, its digital tentacles spreading, its countdown to permanent darkness ticking ever closer. And now, the only thing that could stop it was in the hands of the very man who wanted to see the world burn. Aris was alone again, the fate of the country now resting entirely on his shoulders. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the game had just begun. The betrayal by General Vance left a bitter taste in Aris's mouth, a metallic, acrid tang that mingled with the lingering scent of ozone from the fortress's humming server room. He was back at the command center, but the place no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a trap, a cage built of wires and desperation. Lena, her face etched with a silent, simmering fury, looked over the security footage from the fortress. The camera, damaged by Vance's device, showed only a distorted, static-filled image of the general's calm, chilling smile before it went black. It was all the evidence they had, and it was enough. Aris sat hunched over his terminal, staring at the ghost code. It was no longer a ghost. It was a phantom, an enemy that had a face now, a name. And that name was Vance. He could see it on the monitor, a pulsating, vibrant network of digital destruction spreading like a cancer through the grid. The lines of code, once a subtle, almost invisible threat, were now a screaming, malevolent force. The ghost code was replicating, mutating, becoming something entirely new, a digital poltergeist he hadn't prepared for. He could feel its presence, a cold, digital wind that rattled the core systems and threatened to tear the whole world apart. "He's using the prototype to amplify the code," Aris muttered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and the bitter bile of betrayal. He hadn't looked up from the screen since they returned. He felt like he was back in a lab, but this time the lab was the entire world, and the experiment was a civilization-ending catastrophe. He's not just a madman, he's a brilliant strategist. He's taking the ghost and making it a poltergeist. It's replicating, mutating, becoming something entirely new. Lena, seeing the despair in his eyes, walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was firm and steady, an anchor in the storm of his emotions. Her own expression, while outwardly calm, held the weight of a professional who had been betrayed by one of her own. She knew the protocol for moles and betrayers, but this was different. This was a man with the power to end the world. "What's the plan, Thorne? We can't just sit here and watch." Aris looked at her, his expression a mix of exhaustion and fierce, unyielding determination. He was a scientist, not a soldier, but in this moment he was preparing for war. Marcus said the prototype was the only way. He was wrong. It's a trick. The ghost code is a lock, yes, but there's a different way to open it. We don't have to break it. We have to mirror it. He began to type furiously. The lines of code, once a frantic, desperate attempt to find a weakness, now flowed with a new, focused purpose. He was writing a new program, a counteroffensive, that was a work of twisted art in its own right. It was a reflection of the ghost code, a digital doppelganger. The ghost code is a self-replicating algorithm. It's designed to copy and recopy itself, creating an infinite loop of destruction. But what if we reverse the polarity? What if we use its own logic against itself? We'll create a digital antivirus using the same core principles. We'll fight fire with fire. Lena's eyes widened in alarm. She understood the theory, But the sheer audacity of the plan was a jolt to her system. It was like throwing a match into a powder keg. Aris, that's insane! If it fails, the entire grid will collapse permanently. There'll be no way to recover. We could lose everything for good. It's the only way, he said, his voice flat and hard. The weight of his decision was visible on his face, but he didn't waver. He was a man who had faced impossible odds his entire life, and this was just another one. He was betting the world on a line of code. It's a desperate gamble, but it's our only chance. We don't have time to track him down. The ghost code is moving too fast. We have to beat him at his own game, in a place he can't stop us. He looked up at her, a spark of grim resolve in his eyes. He had lost his mentor, his friend, and a piece of himself, but he was not defeated. We need to find a way to get my code into the grid's core systems. We need a direct line, a back door he doesn't know about. He was a man with a singular purpose, and it was a purpose that would either save the world or plunge it into a darkness from which it would never return. Lena took a deep breath. She thought for a moment, her mind racing through the labyrinthine networks of the country's power infrastructure. She had worked on security protocols for decades, but her mind drifted back to her early training, to the old, forgotten systems they'd studied in her academy days. The old power plant, she said, her voice a low rumble of realization. The one they decommissioned years ago in the outskirts of the city. It's still connected to the grid's backbone. It's a forgotten access point, a ghost in the system, just like your code. It's our only chance. A grim smile played on Aris's lips. The irony was not lost on him. To defeat a ghost, they would have to become ghosts themselves. Then, let's get to it, he said. And with a newfound purpose, he began to write the final lines of a code that would either save the world or destroy it forever. The abandoned power plant was a skeletal ruin of rusted metal and broken windows, a monument to a forgotten era. Its silence was a stark and eerie contrast to the digital chaos it was tethered to, the ghost code humming and screaming through its ancient wires. It was here, in this graveyard of energy, that Aris and Lena would make their last stand. The air was thick with the scent of decay and damp earth, a gritty, physical reality that grounded Aris even as his mind worked in the abstract realm of code. They had managed to create a small mobile uplink to the grid's backbone, and Aris's antivirus was ready to be deployed, a digital sword of his own making. They were about to connect when a small, cold voice filled the air, a voice that was calm and calculated, filled with a terrible certainty. "I knew you would come here. I was waiting." General Vance stepped out of the shadows, flanked by two highly trained operatives. The tactical masks they wore felt like a cruel mockery of Lena's own, a perversion of her purpose. Vance held the prototype, its metallic surface gleaming in the moonlight that filtered through a broken skylight. His face, illuminated by the cold lunar glow, was a mask of triumphant condescension. He looked at Aris not with hatred, but with a kind of sad, pitying regard, as if he were seeing a child who couldn't comprehend the true nature of the world. "You're a fool, Thorne," Vance said, his voice soft, almost paternal. "Your desperate gamble won't work. The ghost code is too powerful now. It's a part of the grid. It's not a separate entity, but the very lifeblood of the system. You can't fight it. You can't kill it. You can only join it. And I'm the only one who knows how to control it." "You're a hypocrite, General," Lena spat, her face a mask of cold fury, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. "You say you're saving the country, but you're a terrorist. You're condemning millions to darkness and death." Vance laughed, a hollow, humorless sound that echoed through the cavernous plant. He looked at Lena, a flicker of professional respect in his eyes, but it was quickly overshadowed by a fanatic's conviction. I'm a visionary, and the world will thank me for it. They'll thank me for bringing them to their knees so they can be reborn. The old ways were failing. This is a new beginning. He moved to a rusted control terminal, and his fingers, moving with the same precise speed Aris had seen at the fortress, began to tap away. Aris knew what he was doing. He was preparing to lock down the last few remaining power stations to ensure that the blackout was absolute and final. The faint, flickering lights on Aris's portable monitor were a stark reminder of how little time they had. Aris didn't hesitate. He grabbed his laptop, his knuckles white as he held the small, fragile device. He connected the mobile uplink to a nearby conduit and began to upload his antivirus. "Lena, distract them," he hissed, his eyes wide and focused on the screen, the lines of his countercode flowing with a frantic, desperate rhythm. "I need time." Lena didn't need to be told twice. She was a professional, a force of nature. She charged forward, a whirlwind of fists and elbows, a blur of motion and purpose. She engaged the two operatives in a brutal hand-to-hand combat, the sounds of their struggle echoing through the cavernous space. Aris watched her, his heart in his throat as he typed the final lines of his code. He could hear the grunts and the sharp cracks of bone, and he knew she was giving everything she had to buy him the precious seconds he needed. He was a programmer, not a fighter, and in this moment, he felt a profound, helpless gratitude for the warrior beside him. General Vance, seeing what Aris was doing, broke off from his terminal. His face, once so calm and composed, was now contorted with a silent rage, a furious snarl that revealed the true depth of his monstrous convictions. He threw the prototype at Aris, a small metallic flash in the darkness. Aris dodged it, but it was a feint. Vance lunged, his movements surprisingly quick and powerful. He tackled Aris to the ground, the force of the impact knocking the air from his lungs. They struggled, their faces inches apart, their breaths ragged and hot. "You're not going to win, Aris," Vance grunted, his face contorted in a silent snarl, the sweat on his brow gleaming in the faint moonlight. "I've thought of everything. You can't beat me. You're just a child playing in a sandbox." "Maybe not," Aris gasped, his voice tight, his face a mask of pain and desperation. He could feel Vance's weight pressing him down, his strength a crushing physical force. But Aris had a different kind of strength, a kind of knowledge that ran deeper than bone and sinew. "But the ghost code, it's a part of me too. I know its flaws. I know its weakness. I know it better than you do, because I helped create it." Just as Vance was about to land a final, crushing blow, Aris managed to connect the prototype, which had skittered across the floor during their struggle, to a nearby server. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort, a single, impossible move. He slammed his fist down, sending the neutralizing sequence into the system. An ear-splitting shriek of feedback ripped through the air, and a blinding blue light erupted from the terminal. The ghost code, the digital poltergeist, was screaming as it was being torn apart, its infinite loops of destruction reversing, its digital tentacles withering and dying. Aris watched, breathless, as a wave of light, the returning power, began to spread across the dark horizon, a beautiful, impossible dawn in a world that had been plunged into eternal night. The blinding, electric blue light that had erupted from the terminal faded, leaving behind a low, electrical hum that was a sound more beautiful than any symphony. Aris lay on the cold concrete floor, his body aching from the struggle, his mind reeling from the cascade of data he had just unleashed. The silence of the abandoned power plant, once a graveyard of energy, was now filled with the gentle whisper of a grid coming back to life. He pushed himself up on his elbows, every muscle screaming in protest, and looked up. General Van stood defeated, exhausted, staring at the terminal. The screen was a blank void, a digital slate wiped clean. The ghost code was gone. It had been neutralized. A new sound began to filter in from the world outside, a sound that was both a promise and a celebration. The distant, growing wail of sirens filled the air as police and federal agents swarmed the power plant. Lena, her face bruised and her jacket torn, but her eyes shining with a deep personal victory, helped him to his feet. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. Her expression said it all. The relief, the exhaustion, the quiet pride. "It's over," she whispered, her voice filled with a profound sense of relief, the words hanging in the air like a final, beautiful chord. Aris could only nod. He was too tired to speak, too drained to form a coherent thought. He just stood there, breathing in the fresh, clean air that had replaced the stale, dusty scent of the power plant. They had won. The world was safe. As he stepped outside, he saw a familiar sight, but it was a sight that now held a new, poignant meaning. The city, which had been a silent, suffocating tomb of darkness just moments ago, was slowly flickering back to life. A few streetlights came on, then a few more. A building in the distance lit up, then another, a slow-moving wave of light spreading across the horizon. It was a domino effect, a slow, beautiful resurrection. As Aris watched, his eyes welled up with a strange, unexpected emotion. He wasn't just watching a city come back to life. He was watching a world be reborn. It was a testament to the fragile, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying power of connection. A single line of code, a single act of courage, and a city was back in the light. The flashing lights of the approaching police cars illuminated Vance's face as he was led away in handcuffs. He didn't struggle. He looked defeated, his face a mask of utter failure. But as he passed Aris, he stopped. He looked at him one last time, a flicker of something in his eyes, not rage, but a chilling certainty. It was the calm, reasoned gaze of a man who believed he was right, even in his defeat. "This is just a temporary fix, Aris," he said, his voice low, his words a cold, chilling prophecy that cut through the celebratory air. "The world is still weak, and they will come again." Aris knew he was right. The ghost code was a symptom of a much larger problem. He had saved the world, but he had not cured it. He had a new, more difficult problem to solve: how to keep the ghost from rising again. The power grid was on, but the world was still fragile, and the darkness, he knew, was always waiting. The sun rose, painting the sky in a blaze of orange and purple. The day was dawning, but the war, for a man who lived in the shadows of the internet, had just begun. He knew his work was not done. He had found his purpose in the light.